So,
Oh,
hello and welcome to Conversations about Language Teaching. I'm Diane Neubauer,
and I'm Reed Riggs.
and today our topic is instructional activities, or you might call them teaching strategies. Or maybe if you've read Bill VanPatten's work, you're thinking, well, how does this fit into his categories, which are tasks, activities, and exercises? So we'll probably get there. We'll talk about that a little bit. So the reason we're thinking about this is that I think many of our listeners are themselves language teachers, and my experience, both as a language teacher myself and in working with other language teachers, when they talk shop, when they talk about what's going well in the classroom, what's working for you, what do students like doing, that sort of thing, much of the time they're talking about something that I would call an instructional activity. So there's sort of the rules of the game, and this is the way that we're going to interact with each other, or with a text, or with some other kind of material, or text, like it could be video, it could be pictures, all those things. But I very regularly think that as language teachers, we think in terms of these instructional activities. And should I launch into the Romanesco cauliflower and the three levels, Reed, or do you
You
have
can,
something you want to
you're leading this
add there?
episode. I think what
Okay.
what we can look forward to is definitions coming up soon, and
Yes.
then extra thoughts after those definitions. But yeah, Romanesco away.
Okay, so if you've seen the image for Conversations about Language Teaching, it is a photo I took of Romanesco cauliflower. It's a kind of cauliflower that has these like Fibonacci patterns in it. So they're really geometric-ish, very mathematically orderly, and yet still organic. And I got this independently of, and then found in a publication by Paul Seedhouse in 2010. He used this same kind of analogy slash metaphor to describe what was happening in classroom interaction. And that was the focus of my dissertation. And I wanted to think about how do we package classroom interaction? What are the qualitative factors about it that make it useful for language learners? And how does it play out in different language classrooms?
I want
So
to
that was
say
my interest.
before you move on,
Mhm.
I want to add,
Yeah.
in a nutshell, the Romanesco cauliflower. It fits this kind of complexity theory way of talking about anything,
Yes.
where the the as you zoom out from something, you see that same thing, and as you zoom
Yeah.
in, you see that same shape. And so with Romanesco cauliflower, you can go buy it in the store, you can look at it, it looks like a head of kind of interesting cauliflower. As you zoom in, or if you break off one of the heads, the head looks a lot like the original big cauliflower. And then it's made of
Yeah.
little, it's got little points on it, and you could tear off one of those, and those look exactly like the same shape as the medium level and the
Yeah.
biggest level. And you can keep doing it.
Yeah.
So you can keep zooming in and seeing
Yeah.
the same kind of shape again and again. It's like the smaller parts, the big part resembles the small parts.
Yeah. And yeah, it's not like just a bunch of little, um, yeah, you said it, but you're fine. I won't
Sure,
repeat
sure.
it. But
It,
the idea is there's complexity all the way down.
yeah,
So if we're applying that to a classroom and classroom interaction, then the way in which a teacher and the students in the classroom take turns and, moment by moment, ask a question, give an answer, lift an eyebrow, like all of these things have this complexity that you can examine really closely, should you wish. And then, so since I already referred to it, that I think of as the like kind of the ground level, that micro interaction level of how do we talk turn by turn as one person speaks, others respond, as that dynamic thing is happening in a classroom. That's kind of my level one, so the smallest micro level. I'm really keen on that, and so is conversation analysis, and we talked about that in a different episode. So
so you're saying
you
level
got
one,
some
you're referring to specifically your dissertation?
kind of, but I'm also thinking about
How you think,
classroom interaction
just how you think.
and
Okay.
therefore
Mhm.
instructional strategies. This is
Sure.
how I now kind of think about classrooms. It's handy.
Hmm.
It's just a way to categorize.
Yeah.
There's nothing magical here. It's just a way to frame it to help me think about it in a more organized way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yes, it was in my dissertation. So I had kind of these 3-level things. So that first level is that micro interaction level. The second level, I'll call it the miso level, MESO, not the Japanese soup, but
No,
the
just
middle. It
meaning
means
meaning
middle.
middle. Yeah.
So micro, middle, and then macro, 3 layers approximately. So that miso layer or miso sphere is where I put instructional strategies. They're kind of like the playbook for how we're going to take these turns and when we're going to stop them and start them and what we're going to try to accomplish through these turns. Are we trying to play a game? Are we trying to watch a video and discuss it? Are we trying to create a story together? Are we asking each other, how are you today? There's like some sort of a beginning, a middle, and end to it. There's sort of a process, sometimes implicitly agreed on by the students and the teacher. Sometimes there's a little bit of friction about the students have a different idea about the way they want to carry this out than the teacher. That gets really interesting too. So that's where I'm going to put instructional strategies. So I'm not thinking of them like teaching methods per se, where we have to do that step and then you have to do that step. I'm looking at like what actually happens and actual patterns of behavior in classrooms. So that's what I'm going to call an instructional activity. That's the way I describe them in my dissertation, or you
Yeah.
might think of them as teaching strategies.
Sure.
So
So
yeah,
these
and then
names, yeah. Oh,
go
did
for
you
it.
want to go for the top level and then get into some definitions?
Okay, we'll go for that. So then that macro level is sort of the overall overarching sense of where are we headed with this language classroom interaction as a whole. So the students' proficiency development across the course of the year, the way in which they develop interactional competence across the year, like those kinds of long-term trajectories. That's what I kind of think of as that macro
Hmm.
level.
So all
So
of these maybe are, I kind of have an extra dimension here that I'm thinking about. Um, I think it sounds to me like you've defined all these in terms of the goals of the participants. You've got the immediate goals of like, I'm saying this and trying to get this kind of response, or that's at the micro, bottom level. And then you've got your meso level, which is, we're trying to get through this instructional activity. Maybe some people would call it a task. Maybe some people call it an activity. Maybe it could be called an exercise, and you can get into Bill VanPatten's
depending on what it
definitions,
was,
and
yeah.
let's get into that in a
Mhm.
moment. And then it's a top level where I'm kind of getting interested here because if it's about the bigger goals of developing proficiency more generally, maybe developing some communication skills more generally, that's still in terms of goals. Do you fit into this sort of background constraints, like the proficiency they're starting with in that moment?
Makes a difference.
Um, okay,
Those are all factors involved.
okay,
So
okay.
yeah, you referenced complexity theory. So in my dissertation, I relied a lot on complex dynamic systems theory, a way of framing complexity theory, and Diane Larson Freeman's work and others in thinking about what are the factors happening in a classroom. Since I'm looking at an organic thing, people, right? People in a classroom, people in the world, in a context. And I wanted to take into account all of those things. So who are the people? Where are they? What technology do they use? What proficiency levels are present? If it becomes relevant, racial or ethnic, sexual or sexuality issues, any of those things that become relevant that you can see as they're interacting, it's relevant. So it's not that I go in from outside and say, I'm looking for that thing. It's that I'm looking at the way in which they interact and trying to understand, okay, what are the factors that I do seem to see affecting the way that they're interacting, the way
Yeah.
that those instructional activities play out,
Hmm.
and therefore maybe some of the big factors in shaping the way that the
Yeah.
long-term trajectory of that classroom looks.
I,
So it's not so much that I'm thinking quite about goals directly.
mhm.
It's more like, well, let me give you the title of the dissertation, and maybe
Sure.
that'll kind of,
Hmm.
it's a long one. Like the
Yeah,
traditional dissertation
as it should
title
be.
needs
Yeah.
to be long with a colon. I have that too.
Hmm.
Yeah. So Chinese language instruction with novice learners, target language topic development, engagement, and comprehension, in online and hybrid classrooms.
Yeah. Where was the colon?
So after learners,
Yeah.
so Chinese language instruction with novice learners, colon.
Colon. Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
It's
And
clear.
so what I was really interested in was the qualities of the use of the target language. And I had to kind of frame that in some way, like calling it rich didn't work for my purpose. That wasn't something I could say, yes, there it is, very easily. But if I talked about topic development, I could. I could see that they continued to build using the target language to do it, prevalent target language at least. Sometimes there was a little English. So that was what I was looking for. Turn by turn, they were building something, building a story, building a conversation, building a discussion around it, something that they were looking at, something that they were comparing their own experiences about, this sort of thing. And then I wanted to see where were students in the midst of those kinds of interactions, what were the instructional strategies or the instructional activities that was more typical of. And I was looking for in those, where was it most often that I saw or heard student engagement of all types, cognitive, behavioral, social, emotional, and then comprehension. So how did they show some kind of interpretation of the target language in use and reflect their understanding of that as they continued to develop these topics?
So this brings to mind, I think this distinction between two concepts would be useful here. It sounds to me, so in 2004, Paul Seedhouse wrote about a distinction between what he called task as work plan versus task in process. And he said that when we talk, because so much of the discussion in second language acquisition research that's about classroom instruction would talk about a task, but they would often not really define what they meant by task. And so he was saying, okay, well, we can have two ways of looking at a task. One is the task that the teacher has sort of printed or explained to say, here's what you're supposed to do. And the other is to actually watch what the people are doing. And so the task as work plan is the first one. And so what did the teacher try to, set up?
Try to set up.
Try
Yeah.
to set up. And then what a task in process is we actually watch how it unfolds. And this brings up another use of the term activity that I've seen in earlier, maybe pragmatics research, maybe earlier conversation analysis research, where they would say, okay, so you have the task, and that's what the students are supposed to do. But what is the actual activity? And when they said that, then they would say, what we mean is, what are they actually doing in the process? So activity in that sense was the task in process,
how it actually
like how
looked.
it's unfolding, like watch what they're doing. And so it sounds to me like you're more focused on that traditional, that notion of activity of like what's unfolding in real time, and also
Right.
that task in process. And so I think those teachers,
not
though,
task is plan.
not task as work
Go
plan.
on.
And so I think often is when I talk with teachers, when I read teachers writing online, when I as a teacher, say, here's a thing you could do. I just did yesterday, a Spanish teacher that uses my classroom said, I'm really trying to build community with one of my classes that struggles. And we talked about it and figured out that she had some students that were kind of dominating and mean early on.
Mm.
And it seemed to create a culture of quietness in her classroom. And she said that those students have changed since the beginning of the school year. And she thinks it's a more safe environment, but she's not sure what she could do. And she's new, she's busy, she doesn't have time for a lot of creative things. And so she's following a textbook, Spanish grammar structures, like that's her current curriculum. And I'm helping her where she's at. And so, but I said, for community building, I've heard of some cool things that just get students to share about themselves, such as a calendar talk. And you could start small, like a quick 1 minute. It's like, who's got something coming up on the weekend? You try to do it in Spanish in your target language, and then get like one little fact up on the calendar. And you say, oh, very cool, thanks. You can shut it off then. You move on to the next thing. But what you're doing, and you don't call on students. You don't say,
Right. You let them say if they want to say something.
Yeah, you let the shy ones be shy, let the extroverts be an extrovert. But by doing that, you're showing that you're safe, the environment is safe, the classmates are safe. Then the next time around, maybe it's again just the extrovert. But again, you're showing that you're safe, the classroom is safe, the classmates are safe. This is a safe thing to participate in. Eventually, you'll get other ones to participate. And maybe after a few months, you might have your most shy students starting to participate. Again, these are sort of task as work plan because I'm just saying what you should do. But this is again, like all I could tell her was the task as work plan because she hasn't done it yet. I have nothing to observe.
Right.
And so I think
Yeah.
as we move forward in our discussion today, everything you've described so far sounds like the task and process, like you're watching how it unfolds. And I've been curious about this term instructional activity, which I love. And you and I use this term a lot now instead of task, instead of activity, instead of exercise, instead of strategy. And my sense is that the word strategy came about among kind of input-based teachers because they didn't want to lock
Sure.
down the term. Like they didn't want to say, oh, this is a task, but not an activity. Just
Yeah, we
sidestep.
started reading Bill VanPatten or
We
hearing
started
from him
reading, yeah,
and trying to like avoid like, okay, oh, what is it that I'm doing? Oh, I don't know. We'll call it a
we'll
strategy.
call it
I
a
like,
something, call it a fourth,
a
we had a
little
fourth
pragmatic
term,
decision or practical
practical
decision
decision.
about,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think that's nice though, because now we don't have to like work within his very helpful analysis, but we don't always have to, we might not be thinking about that layer right then. And so
Yeah,
it's just like,
makes it
here, I'm
easy.
framing things in my
Yeah.
classroom. We're going to do this thing together for a while. And
When I
that's,
see teachers share something like one special person interview, calendar talk, map talk, picture talk,
right.
clip chat, they'll say like, these are some useful strategies. And so it looks to me like the nameable, uh, I guess what we traditionally call an activity, not Bill VanPatten's definitions, but just what general teachers would say, like, oh, what can I do today?
Mhm.
Or you could do this activity, you could do that activity. That's kind of what's getting the name strategy from a lot
Yeah.
of more the input-based teacher community. Um, and so all these names are fine. I don't have a problem with any names. I
Mhm.
don't, to me, it's about the concepts. I just want to know what's your definition? Hey, sounds good. So when
Yeah.
we say instructional activity, I want to pin this down. Are we talking about both the task as work plan and task in process? Like for us, when we say instructional activity, what are we getting at?
Yeah, I am getting at a little bit of both.
Okay.
So people might frame it in a certain way, like, okay, this is calendar talk. This is like a social emotional check-in. This is like that. So
That's an instructional
I
activity.
I I would say it could
Okay.
be,
Hmm.
if the teacher treats it that way.
Okay. Okay.
It could just
Sure.
incidentally happen now and then, and I don't think I would necessarily call it that. But if it's something that's like, we're gonna do this, it's not just a little one-off, one-time
Okay.
interaction, but it's something
Okay.
that they're like, they start the class with this thing, or they spend the second half of class doing that thing, or another instructional strategy would be like sustained silent reading. And
Hmm.
so, it doesn't always have to be interaction. It doesn't always have to be a teacher-led interaction. However, I was looking at novice classrooms, and I often am thinking about novice learners. I feel like that's the bottleneck, especially with Chinese language teaching. If students don't begin, and we talked about this in a very early episode about beginning classes, if students don't begin with a sense of success through the use of the target language, I think they're going to continue to have the pattern for them is going to be, this is too hard for me, or this is, yeah. So getting that use of the target language at the novice level that is interesting, so there's engagement from students that you can somehow observe, and that they can really understand target language, and they can participate in the development of topics turn by turn. That's, to me, that's the sweet spot in
Hmm.
language teaching right
Hmm.
there.
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
that's why I was aiming for that. How do I, draw on other research and other concepts and theories to explain, like,
Yeah.
what is this target language use thing that I really am driving towards?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
It's
um,
also it's very much in line. A lot of the conversation analysis for second language acquisition literature starts with the assumption. They say like, we're starting from the place of assuming that learning happens in participation and interaction. So, and I think teachers would agree with it in different words that, my students won't participate in what I'm doing I don't expect any learning to happen. I don't expect any acquisition to happen. Like they're not going to show any progress if I cannot get their basic attention
Yeah.
and not just attention, but like doing what we're doing, participating in what we're doing. So I don't think it's a too much of a sciencey concept to say that students need to participate in a classroom in order to learn, but that is looked at the micro level in
Yeah.
conversation analysis. And I think a lot of the data that looks at what's going on in that interaction is selected for just when they are participating, because otherwise there's nothing really to look at. You could look at how they choose not to participate, and there is research on that too. What do students do to avoid participating? That's not really trying to show learning. It's just showing what's going on. Just
Yeah.
what are humans
Describing
what are
it.
humans
Right.
doing? Um,
Yeah. Yeah. And I
so
took for granted that that kind of sweet spot I described, where
yeah,
there's target language is prevalent, student engagement and comprehension is somehow evident, and they're developing topics, so they're going somewhere with
yeah,
the use through the use of the language.
yeah,
To me, I'm taking for granted that that will lead to development of language proficiency.
right.
I wasn't trying to prove it. I didn't have a hypothesis. I was trying to say, where are the places and what are the qualities and factors involved when those things all come together in classrooms that were either one was online totally and the other two were hybrid. Some students in the classroom with the teacher, some students online, zooming in.
Yeah,
So it was the spring of 2021, and classes were still in a funny format in different ways in
yeah.
different schools in the US.
You were kind
So
of watching also, that was a time when teachers were figuring out how to best teach over Zoom. It was actually new for everybody.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah. By the time I observed them, they had been most of a year doing
yeah,
that. So it was
yeah,
April and May of 2021 that I was collecting my data. So i.e., I was zooming in too.
yeah,
So I joined the classes by Zoom, usually staying off camera. I had introduced myself to the students at a specific time before I
yeah,
first observed, and with agreement of parents, students, teacher, school, I
yeah,
was able to visit the schools that way.
yeah, yeah. So I have two tracks we could go on right now. One is that we've been promising to define Bill VanPatten's two, three things, but I kind of feel like that's a
Yeah.
little gone now. Um, maybe,
Yeah. Do we need
maybe,
it?
I don't
We'll
know.
link
Well,
it.
let's do it. We would link it. Okay. Let me say it real quick,
Yeah.
just to
And
get out
we'll
of
we'll
there.
link the Seed House thing we
Sure.
referenced and
Yeah.
my
Actually,
dissertation too.
no, I can tie it together. This does fit the next thing I wanted to ask. Okay. So given that, um, so Bill Van Patten offers these three definitions that they're somewhat useful. They don't have to be used, but they can be useful. What he says is a task is where there's communication with purpose, I think.
Yeah, like there's a focus on meaning
Hmm.
and a communicative purpose. I think those are
Yeah,
the two.
right, right.
We should have double checked.
No, that's fine. Okay, so that's good. But his activity was that there's some sort of focus on meaning, but there's no purpose. And so turn to your
Right.
classmate and talk about the weekend. There's no end point to that.
Yeah,
And you don't even have to check on what they're doing. They might be communicating. They might be, but given those instructions, they might also not be. And so
right.
who knows what they're doing.
And
There's
it
nothing to
could
check at
be,
the end.
I think what happens in a classroom where there's a lot of emphasis on comprehensible input is that's often what our things where Van Patten would count it as an activity where, yeah, you needed to understand messages in language, but what were you doing through it?
Yeah.
Was it really the purpose there was really about using vocabulary or
Yeah.
learning vocabulary? It wasn't
Sure.
about using language in order to
Yeah. Yeah.
learn something about each other, learn
Yeah.
about the world, create something through
So
the language. Necessarily, it
yeah,
might. And
yeah.
then he kind of just kind of a
Yeah.
task.
I have sort of thoughts on two. We can call them what input-based teachers often call two strategies. One is called picture talk, and maybe clip chat could do this too. And another one is
Mhm.
special person interview, and I'll put these in a separate category. So special person interview and calendar talk in one category, and another one is picture talk and clip chat in another category. So the picture talk and clip chat oftentimes doesn't have to be the way it goes, but oftentimes the way it goes is the teachers just asking students and providing students with the vocabulary to talk about what's in the picture. And when it's that simple, I would say that even at the turn by turn level, it's kind of purposeless in terms of communication. Like if I point to a man and say, "What's this?" If you're an adult, you know you know what you're looking at. And so
Yeah,
for
it's
me
a
to provide
display
the
question.
language, it's just I'm providing language. Now, sometimes picture talk goes into speculation about what might happen next or what the person is thinking or what happened before. And in those
Yeah.
cases, I would say that communication can really be happening because we are creating something together. We're making up information that didn't exist in the picture before.
Hmm.
So that
Yeah.
there's communication happening there. I think that Bill VanPatten has a higher standard, though, to say what's the end goal of that little string of talk. Like you've interacted about this picture. In the end, either what did you learn or what product did you create? And so with a calendar talk and with a special person interview, I think that something different necessarily happens because a special person interview, we're never saying like the display stuff. Like, does this person have hair? Does this person have shoes right now?
I
Like
hope not.
we skip over
At
those.
least maybe, again, a little incidental here or there, and it's almost like a little joke
It
kind
can
of
be
feel.
funny.
Like
If you're
it sounded
playing,
funny
that's different.
even for you to say it.
If you're getting
Yeah,
a
yeah,
laugh,
yeah.
then
But
that's a playful purpose, and that's fine. I would call that a purpose if you're actually trying to entertain. That's okay. But often with the calendar talk, you're trying to put real student information on the calendar. Who's got a birthday coming up? Who did something cool this weekend? I have a student
yeah.
who told me she's dancing ballet for the Nutcracker at the Hawaii
Oh,
Ballet Theater. And that wasn't part of that. That was a separate thing she told me in English, but that could have been the kind of information that would go up on the
right.
calendar. And in that sense, real information is being shared. The calendar has been changed, and we can see that some information has gone up on the calendar. So even if it's
Oh,
short, there's still some sort of product at the end of it. And
yeah.
so those I think are closer to what a task might be. Bill Van Pattens are always the examples he always gives are surveys. It's like student
Hmm.
surveys. So who's done what, and you fill out the survey. But
And
at
and
the
then
end,
maybe decide, yeah, like okay, so how athletic is our class, or
yeah, yeah,
how are we inside people or outside people, and then
mhm,
how does that compare maybe to a target language community?
yeah,
So you can bring in a cross-cultural
mhm,
understanding
mhm,
too.
yeah,
But you're learning about each other, maybe also about the world and making some cultural comparisons and stuff.
yeah,
I
yeah.
think that stuff's great too. It's yeah,
Hit one more, and then we'll get back to your dissertation findings and ideas from that. So his third one would be an exercise. And
yeah, right.
that most often looks like what you see in textbooks where there's no communication and there's no purpose. And I did a bunch of these.
And there's not necessarily interpretation of meaning even
Correct. Right.
necessary there.
Yeah.
So
So I do this on Duolingo a lot. I can see that there's a new and a blank. And so I'm looking for the verb that ends in ONS. There is a
yeah,
sentence there, but I'm in game
French.
mode. Yeah, it's French. I'm in game mode, meaning I'm just trying to go as fast as I can
Yeah,
and as accurately and quickly as I can. And I'm starting to think that maybe that could be like a definition of a game mindset. Like when you're in game
yeah,
mode, you're trying to be as accurate and fast as possible. And what gets lost is meaning, like any attention to anything else. Game mode means going accurate and fast with like no attention to meaning. And so I'm not reading the sentence
yeah,
because I'm going to get through my quick Duolingo time. Like I can make my time the fastest if I just see the the subject. It's a new, or maybe it's a vous. Then I'm looking for the verb that ends in ez. I choose it, move on.
ending.
And
Yep.
that's very much what happens with textbook activities, where it's like find match the words that go in the blanks that have the right ending. And so yeah, so these are useful distinctions, and it's okay to use
Yeah,
his terms. It's okay to not use his terms. I think, as long as you're aware of
yeah,
these distinctions. These like, what does it mean?
yeah. It
So
helps us think about the qualities involved
yeah,
in the way that we're interacting.
yeah, and so interaction is exactly what I wanted to focus on next because that's exactly what you were looking at, and you weren't in your dissertation. You weren't looking for meaningless, times when they were interacting with no attention to meaning, such as the teacher calling on students to give their answers from workbook answers. If that's done in the target language, then we could say that that
Okay.
itself is a kind of, target language interaction. Maybe that has value.
Hmm.
I've
Yeah,
seen that happen, and I kind of liked it when I've seen it happen when
yeah,
calling on workbook answers is done in the target language. Like, okay, that aspect of it is okay to me. Um,
right. That part of it has made it into a target language activity that has some little bit of communicative value there.
You're
Because
truly asking for their
you're
answers.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's not like the textbook stuff is the
No,
good part of that.
no,
But that's the
I
part
don't care
maybe
about
that the
that part.
teacher thought was the thing
Sure.
they were aiming at.
Sure.
But yeah, it's actually that target language back and forth with the students about it. That's
Yeah.
the good thing. Yeah.
So you were looking at the micro level turn by turn as the low base
Mhm.
level. And you could kind
Yeah.
of see there how that was building up the actual mid level, the meso level, like
The
that.
instructional activity.
Yeah, it's sort of like bricks
Yeah.
building up a house. And so the house maybe is the meso level.
Yeah.
Um, and maybe the community, the town is the high level. Hey, that kind of works. That
Something
metaphor
like that
works. And
could work.
so you could say the town's got some building codes. Maybe it's got some hills, and so the house you build has to fit the environment. But the house is made
Yes.
of smaller bricks and wood beams and nails and stuff. And so the micro
Right.
interaction is those little wood beams and nails and bricks.
Hmm.
And I think there's two cool things to look at there. There's the ongoing interaction, but there's also the problematic ongoing interaction, and that's kind of where you can see
Hmm.
where they course correct. It's like, whoop, we're not
Yep.
doing that right now, and that kind of shows you what the overall, you can lay bricks in a row, but then you stop because you got to turn a corner to get the next wall that just goes in a different
Yep.
direction. So is there
Yeah.
what did you?
Where there were problems was it helped me understand what what was the stuff that the teacher treated as good.
Yeah,
Like, I could
yeah,
tell then, like, oh, okay, they really think the students are on board now, or I see a
mm,
lot of redirection of students. They are not the teacher is not finding this
yeah.
to be ideal interaction. So they're
So
continuing to prompt students to do something or that kind of thing.
yeah,
So yeah, a lot of those times were broken up. They weren't really topic development things. So in the three classrooms I was looking at, should I dive into the
yeah.
activities I saw? So I was looking at everything, right? Not everything was prevalent in target language use. Not everything that had some target language use necessarily would develop a topic, although in the case of these three classrooms, I think they all did. Like you could have a target language activity that's like vocabulary matching games or something. That's target language, but it's not topic. There's no
There's no
topic
topic
development.
there,
There's no
right?
communication going on and forth. So I
In a
wanted that
sense,
back and forth.
there's a task because when the vocabulary has been put in its place, then you can see that end product and say, okay, this thing is
Yeah,
done. But that's
it
almost
was pretty
like double
weak.
dipping. It's kind of double dipping. I'm going to call that an
Yeah,
activity. Yeah,
yeah. I think task-based people would not want to call that a task.
sure, that's fine.
Yeah. So I was looking at these three specific classrooms. So when I say that there were three types of activities that I saw that sweet spot that I was aiming for finding, I'm not saying those are the three spots you'll ever see this in any classroom, right? We just talked all about this context-based issue. So in these classrooms, they used a variety of instructional activities, some which were developing topics through the use of the target language, where I also saw some student engagement and comprehension coming out.
Can you give an example
And so,
of
yes.
like the kinds of topics that developed? Maybe one or two?
Oh, I mean, something like teacher starts the class and says, "What's today's date?" Okay, write the date and using the target language primarily to accomplish this. Hey, do you think it's going to rain? Oh, you like rain, don't you, so and so? And the student goes, yeah. And their
Mm,
classmates are like, what?
mm,
What?
mm.
Yeah, you didn't know she likes rain. You like rain too, don't you? This had apparently come up before. So this little like teacher is remembering like I'm going to start a topic development by calling on student things they told me in the past. So she pulls that little out and they go back and forth a little bit like, oh, who likes rain? Who doesn't like rain? Like, yeah. And so they the am I going to name the topic there? Well, no, I was going to name the instructional activity and it was calendar talk. So
Okay.
they were talking about the date, the weather, who liked what was it going to be like that day? Who predicted what? And then for a while,
Mm.
you'd hear the teacher do something like, "Haba," in Chinese, like, "All right
Okay.
then,"
All right.
or
Yeah.
"Okay." Yeah. And so they're like wrapped that one up and then they moved on to
Close.
some other kind of introduction of new instructions. Like, what are we doing next?
Yeah.
So that would
Cool.
be an instructional strategy.
Sure.
So that first one is an example of the first category I developed in what I was seeing. I called it small talk
Mm.
because it was like that. It was like calendar talk. Didn't last too long, couple minutes, maybe three. And other ones would be how are you conversations? Like, how are you today? So and so, how are you doing? Like one of the teachers started out class saying, how are you all? And she just
Yeah.
kind of waited and looked, and some students are doing this, and some are like nodding, some are smiling at her.
Yeah. Thumbs ups.
And
Yeah. Mhm.
yeah, and then she called on one and asked, like, hey, how are you? Are you tired today? Because
Mm.
she knew something about the student that would make her more tired that morning. And the student said, yeah. And then they went back and forth about that. So
Mm.
again,
Mhm.
they're
Mhm.
developing a topic through the
Yeah.
use of the target language. The teacher, because she was working in each case, these were working with novice level learners, the teacher carried the complexity of language and was usually the question asker, but the students' involvement there helped to develop the direction of the topic. So how did things unfold? It was very much dependent, even on things like
Yeah.
student nod and
Yeah.
smile,
Yeah.
but also their verbal contributions. So small talk was the first one. The second instructional activity, I found evidence for really being that sweet spot. Um, I called it personalized questions and story asking. So story asking being something from TPRS and personalized questions kind of developing out of a broader way of looking at that. So these were, how did I categorize them together? Because in both cases, the teacher doesn't know the student's answer. There's the students are producing either based on their experience, their preference, their opinion, or their imaginative idea, something that was going to develop the topic. And then the third category of instructional activity I called discussing a text. So it could be a video, picture or pictures, reading material that they're reading and then now they're discussing, where they're imagining, maybe like you had referenced, maybe they're predicting what's going to happen next. Maybe they're comparing to the student's own experiences. Like, oh, do you think that was a good idea? You know, oh, look here at this picture. What are they doing? Huh? Do you do that too? Like, so there was some kind of ongoing topic development
Yeah.
stuff there.
We're getting cut off.
Yep.
Let's jump off and jump back on real quick, and then
Mhm.
maybe spend like 5 more minutes.
Yeah, a little wrap up
A little
probably.
bit.
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay, so I wanted to make sure before we finished this episode that I talked through some of the issues that would often people would ask about this. So what are you saying about instructional activities as a whole? What does your study in these particular contexts, what does that say maybe about classroom practices for other teachers? Because I'm not saying this predicts that everywhere this is going to be the best thing, right? You can't say that with qualitative research. You can rarely say that with quantitative research, in my opinion. But the thing that it does say is that there was evidence of prevalent target language use that developed topics where students had comprehension and engagement in these types of instructional strategies carried out in these types of ways. If you do some things that are similar, you can, I think, legitimately say, this is a good place to begin. I value target language that develops topics. These instructional strategies or instructional activities, as called them there, really appeared to do that in these contexts. So it's worth looking at and considering seriously if those are your goals for your classroom as well. So that's what they do, and they talk in depth about how did that happen. So there's little micro strategies that we're not talking about in this episode that came out of this study too. Like what was it that they did to help sustain target topic development, for example?
I think that there is something new there though that you're showing a possibility. Like
Yes.
if I said, hey, you should come look at these people, they can fly. And I'd say, I don't think that's possible. And I'd be like, no, I have, documentation. I collected data. I did a whole research thing, and you should come look at it. These are people that can fly. That would be a novel contribution to our understanding of what's possible. I
Mhm.
think in your situation, what we've often seen in the second language acquisition research literature is beginners are always doing what's called listen and do tasks. And so it's the teacher
At
saying,
best.
where's the squirrel? Or show me a red color. Like, show me. And students hold up little cards, and there's no topic development in those. It's designed
Right.
to be randomized. It's designed to be like, now show me orange. Now show me purple. Sit down if is another one. So it's like,
Mhm.
sit down if you're wearing black today. Sit down if your shoes have no shoelaces. Um,
Mhm.
it only
Yeah.
works if it's
Good
randomized. Oh,
comprehension,
it's
but
fine. These
yeah,
are fine
it's not.
activities,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
they have a good place, and people should do them, and I support them. They're awesome. But what I think the assumption in doing those is saying, well, beginners can't
Only.
handle a continuous topic. And so we
Right.
have to do these other randomized things where the information is randomized. And
Yeah.
so and there are benefits to those listen and do types of tasks where you're truly checking that they're understanding the language and not
Hmm.
other context. With the topic, you've got discourse information. We've talked
Right.
about this person so far. You can use that information to guess what I'm saying next.
Yeah.
Whereas with no topic, when it's randomized, then you're truly checking, like, did they understand my word shoelaces? Did they
Yeah.
understand the word red? And so there's value in both. But
Right.
what you showed is that teachers in classrooms not trained by you are already doing this where they're using the target language.
Well,
Uh,
one was trained by me, I should say.
okay, one was trained by you. That's good
I
to know.
discovered
All right.
later,
Oh,
uh,
okay. Well, you didn't know at the
but
time. All
not
right.
not exclusively
Okay.
by me. Hmm.
So a lot of teachers say this too. They're beginners, so they can't handle that. So with beginners, I'll just teach grammar. With beginners, I'll prepare them for later.
Right.
Topic development, I think that most people would oftentimes say, oh, they're just having a conversation, or oh, they're just actually using the language. And a lot of teachers would say, well, not with beginners, of course. With beginners, you have to do these sort of build-up
Yeah.
activities. Yeah. So you
Yeah,
showed
I
that.
definitely wanted to show that because I knew this was happening and I was looking for teachers who did the kinds of teaching knew was do and so that I had a specific area of interest. I had specific kinds of teachers I needed to find for that to be observable.
Right.
Because like as you said, a lot of places novices are not treated as being able to do this.
Right.
And the other thing that I wanted to show was that while teacher talk can be an oppressive, limiting thing on students' contributions, it can also be empowering. Where even if you have a very limited proficiency level, if the teacher treats your student contributions as counting and as something to continue to build off of,
Yeah.
it can be really empowering.
Yeah.
And I definitely saw that. So
Yeah. 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 So, that's really good. I have one extra thing, but I don't know if it's necessary. But now that I brought it up, I guess we have to do it.
oh, go for it. Yeah,
So
say it.
here's a fun extra thing. I like to when something seems useful, I want to throw it in. So I sort of intuitively I always write my agenda on the board because when my students walk in, they want to know what are we doing today. So my agenda is up there. It has to be before they walk in the room. I have to write it up real quick.
Yep.
And it's just it's an
High
adolescent.
school was for me that
Yeah, middle school,
same.
high school. It's like and if it's not up there, then they'll do their own thing. So I was going to write picture talk, but then I thought I had a little playful intuition, and I thought, well, my picture is this little lizard guy, and so I wrote lizard talk on the board. And so when students came in, they're like, lizard. They said like lizard talk. What's that? And I was like, well, we're going to talk about lizard people, and they're like, oh. And so like that immediately it did a few things. Like it caught their attention. And so there's that issue of buy-in and participation. Um, but it also narrowed down what to expect about what we're going to be contributing to a topic or talking about.
Yeah.
And so I started making a routine out of it where I had different lizard people, images doing different things, sometimes related to Chinese culture, sometimes doing like I had one for Tomb Sweeping Day, Chinese Qingming
Hmm.
Jie.
Yeah.
Chinese Qingming Jie, my students were, this was sparked because I had real images and students were trying to say playful things. And I said, we're not going to get playful here. It's disrespectful.
Um,
Let me make some lizard people for you. And we can say
yeah.
anything we want about the lizard people. We can get disrespectful. We can get
Mhm.
playful to the point of being
Yeah.
disrespectful. Not when it's real photos of real people though. And so,
Agreed.
so it's lizard talk. And then I had another one. We were talking about campus design. We have building going on campus. And so I made a unit for my ninth graders about building facilities on campuses and how we can use them. And then it would end with their suggestions about things we could do on our own campus and how to use our own facilities in different ways. But I wanted a lot of space to get creative. And so I had maps of Mars, real maps of
Yeah.
Mars with real locations labeled. And I had a zoom in on the North Pole and a zoom in on the South Pole. And so I got to ask them, 北极还是南极, the North Pole or the South Pole? And they chose the North Pole. So I used that image. But we called that Mars Talk. And
Hmm.
we could have called it Picture Talk. And in more generally, it is Picture Talk. But the topic was narrowed down for them beforehand. We're not talking about just anything we want. We're trying to decide campuses to build on specific locations that are labeled on Mars. And so for that class, I kept saying, okay, you have our Mars talk. It's coming up. We're going to talk about Mars. And so the name of the topic was already in the title on my agenda. And
Yeah,
it
it's
caught
cool. It gives
interest.
them an
Yeah.
expectation.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Now, and in the case of my dissertation, had I been zooming in and observing you all, I would have called that discussing a text
Yeah. And you could
because
call it that. Yeah.
I wanted a bigger category
Right.
package for it. So
Yep.
yeah.
Yep. So yeah, different labels for different purposes. And I
Right.
think that's what this all comes down to. This idea of methods being like, tell me what to do. And it's so context dependent. Like what you do, what you plan to do, what you actually do in the moment, and the bigger, large level constraints and goals of your institution, of the
Yeah.
proficiency you're trying to get at, the communication skills you're trying to build. Um, all these things are interplay all the time. And so it's really good to, yes, it's good to get ideas from other teachers. It's also good to be very aware of your own, moment by moment context that you're in.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
This
Good
has
place to
been
finish, I
fun. Yeah, we'll
think.
finish here. All right. Okay. Well, thanks, Diane. This has been fun. Thanks, everybody. We want to thank listeners in
Kazakhstan.
Kazakhstan.
Thank you
Yeah.
for remembering.
Yeah.
Last time I wanted to say it in our data on the show, our third most common country right now is listeners from Kazakhstan. So hello
Yeah.
in Shymkent and elsewhere in Kazakhstan.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, everybody, for listening. In the United States and Australia. Yeah, we
The
have a lot of
UK and
the
Canada and
UK. Yeah. We have a
France.
cool list.
Yeah.
Okay. Until next time. Bye, Dan.
Bye bye.